You unwrap a chocolate bar. The foil crinkles. The smell hits you first, sweet and slightly bitter. You break off a piece and let it melt on your tongue. It feels ordinary. It feels safe. But the thing dissolving in your mouth right now used to be currency, medicine, and poison, all at once, and for most of its history, no one ever ate it like this. How did that happen? Let's trace it back. 3,000 years ago, in the humid lowlands of what is now southern Mexico, the Olmec people were doing something strange with the seeds of a strange tree. The tree is called Theobroma cacao. Later, a Swedish botanist named Carl Linnaeus would give it that name himself, Theobroma. It means food of the gods. He wasn't exaggerating for effect. He meant it literally, because by the time he named it in the 1700s, cacao had already been treated as sacred for thousands of years. But here's the twist you don't expect. The Olmec, and later the Maya, weren't eating chocolate bars. They were drinking it. And it wasn't sweet. Picture it. A Maya priest grinds roasted cacao beans on a stone slab called a metate. The paste is thick, oily, almost black. He mixes it with water, chili peppers, cornmeal, and sometimes a splash of fermented liquid. No sugar, none at all. Sugarcane hadn't even reached the Americas yet. He pours the mixture back and forth between two vessels, high above his head, again and again, until a thick reddish foam rises to the top. That foam was the whole point. It was considered the most valuable part of the drink. Bitter, spicy, frothy, and reserved almost entirely for royalty, warriors, and religious ceremonies. Archaeologists have actually found the proof of this in the dirt. At a site called Colha in Belize, researchers uncovered pottery vessels dating back over 3,000 years with cacao residue still chemically detectable inside them. Food historians Sophie and Michael Coe documented this shift extensively, showing how cacao moved through Olmec, Maya, and later Aztec society, not as a treat, but as something closer to a sacrament. And by the time the Aztec Empire rose to power, cacao had become something even stranger. It became money. Aztec markets didn't run on coins. They ran on cacao beans. A single bean could buy you a tamale. 100 beans, according to Spanish colonial records, could buy you a slave. People counterfeited cacao beans by hollowing them out and stuffing them with clay or sand, which tells you everything about how valuable they were. This was a currency you could also drink, hoard, gift, and worship, all at the same time. So how did something this sacred, this bitter, this exclusive, end up as a $2 bar in a gas station checkout line? The answer involves conquest, chemistry, and one very persistent Dutch chemist. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 1500s, they encountered this bitter, spiced cacao drink, and, according to most historical accounts, did not enjoy it at first. It was too bitter for European palates. But someone, likely Spanish colonists living in Mesoamerica, had an idea. Add sugarcane, newly being cultivated on colonial plantations, and the chili disappears, replaced by cinnamon and vanilla. Suddenly, this bitter ritual drink becomes something else entirely, something sweet, warm, and addictive. This is the part of the story that most chocolate documentaries skip. The sugar that transformed cacao into something Europeans loved came from plantations worked by enslaved Africans and indigenous laborers. As chocolate's popularity exploded across Spanish and later French and English aristocracy, the demand for both cacao and sugar accelerated the expansion of the transatlantic slave trade into West Africa and the Caribbean. The sweetness you taste today has a bitter foundation that has nothing to do with cacao's actual flavor. For about 200 years, chocolate stayed a drink, and an expensive one. It was thick, oily, and separated easily because cacao is naturally about 50% fat. That fat is called cocoa butter, and it made chocolate drinks greasy and unpleasant to actually digest. Then, in 1828, a Dutch chemist named Coenraad Johannes van Houten solved the fat problem almost by accident. He invented a hydraulic press that could squeeze most of the cocoa butter out of roasted cacao beans, leaving behind a dry cake that could be pulverized into a fine powder. He also treated it with alkaline salts, a process now called Dutching, which made the powder mix more smoothly with water and mellowed its bitterness. For the first time in 3,000 years, cacao could be turned into a powder instead of a paste. This single invention did two things. It made cocoa powder cheap and easy to produce, and it created a surplus of leftover cocoa butter that manufacturers didn't know what to do with. That surplus is the real reason the solid chocolate bar exists at all. In 1847, a British company named J.S. Fry and Sons figured out that if you took that leftover cocoa butter and mixed it back into cacao powder along with sugar, instead of mixing it with hot water, you got a paste that could be poured into a mold and cooled into a solid block. This was the world's first eating chocolate bar. Not a drink anymore. A bar. Something you could hold, break, and put directly into your mouth. Once chocolate could be solid, it could be mass-produced, and that's exactly what happened. In Switzerland, a chocolatier named Rudolf Lindt invented a machine in 1879 called a conchi, which slowly rolled and aerated melted chocolate for hours, sometimes days, smoothing out the gritty texture into something silky. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, an American businessman named Milton Hershey built an entire factory town around cheap, mass-produced milk chocolate, aiming not at aristocrats anymore, but at ordinary working people who had never been able to afford chocolate in their lives. Do you see the pattern here? Every single leap in chocolate's history was really about accessibility. Who was allowed to have it, and who wasn't. For 3,000 years, cacao belonged to priests, kings, and warriors. Then, colonization stripped away its bitterness and its meaning, turning it into a sweet export built partly on forced labor. Then, industrial chemistry stripped away its fat and turned it into something solid, cheap, and shelf-stable. Each step made chocolate more available and, ironically, less connected to what it originally was. So, what does your brain actually do with this thing now? Cacao naturally contains compounds like theobromine and small amounts of caffeine, mild stimulants that create a gentle sense of alertness. It also contains phenylethylamine, a compound sometimes nicknamed the love chemical, because your brain releases small amounts of it during moments of attraction. But here's the part that actually matters for your daily habit. Modern chocolate bars are not built around those compounds. They're built around sugar and fat in almost exactly the same ratio researchers have identified as the human brain's ideal reward combination. Psychologists sometimes call this the bliss point, the precise blend of sweetness and fat content that maximizes craving without triggering the sensation of being full. That's not an accident. Food scientists calibrate it deliberately, the same way Van Houten calibrated his press 2 centuries earlier, just with a different goal. So the next time you unwrap a chocolate bar, notice what's actually happening. You're not tasting an ancient Maya ceremonial drink. You're tasting the end result of a Dutch chemist's fat extraction problem, a British company's leftover cocoa butter, and a Swiss inventor's conching machine, all optimized over 200 years to hit your brain's reward system as efficiently as possible. It started as a bitter, frothy drink reserved for kings, meant to be sipped slowly and reverently. It ends as a $2 bar you can unwrap and finish in under a minute, without thinking about it at all. You unwrap a chocolate bar. But you are not tasting what you think you're tasting.